It was a Sunday that started like any other, deceptively ordinary in every way. The warm May sun filtered through the curtains of the modest two-story house where my wife, Sarah, and I had been living with her mother, Barbara, for the past 2 years. We had moved in with the intention of saving money for our own place, a dream that seemed to be inching closer with each passing month. I remember the day vividly. I was in our room, hunched over my laptop, poring over real estate listings in our area. The coffee in my mug had long gone cold, forgotten in my absorption with the task at hand. Sarah was downstairs, the muffled sounds of her laughter drifting up as she watched her favorite sitcom. "Mike. Sarah. Can you come down here for a minute?" Barbara's voice cut through the quiet afternoon, an edge to it that immediately set me on alert. I closed my laptop and made my way downstairs, meeting Sarah in the hallway. Her brow was furrowed, a question in her eyes that I couldn't answer. We found Barbara in the living room, sitting ramrod straight in her favorite armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mom, is everything okay?" Sarah asked, settling onto the couch. I sat next to her, an inexplicable sense of unease growing in the pit of my stomach. Barbara's eyes, usually warm and inviting, were cold and hard as she looked at us. The silence stretched for a moment, thick and uncomfortable, before she finally spoke. "I need $20,000 to renovate the house," she declared, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "If you can't get the money in a month, you'll have to leave." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt Sarah stiffen beside me, her sharp intake of breath the only sound in the suddenly silent room. "What? Mom, what are you talking about?" Sarah's voice was high, tinged with disbelief and a hint of panic. I found myself unable to speak, my mind reeling from the unexpected demand. $20,000. In a month. It was an impossible sum, especially given our current financial situation. Barbara's gaze didn't waver. "You heard me. This house needs work, and I can't afford it on my own. You've been living here rent-free for 2 years. It's time you contributed." I finally found my voice. "Barbara, we've been saving every penny we can. We don't have that kind of money just lying around. Our savings barely cover half of that." "Then figure it out," she snapped, her tone brooking no argument. "Sell something. Get a loan. I don't care how you do it, but I need that money." Sarah leaned forward, her face a mask of confusion and hurt. "Mom, why are you doing this? We've always helped around the house, we buy groceries, it's not enough." Barbara cut her off, rising abruptly from her chair. "This is my house, and I'm telling you what I need. 1 month. $20,000. Or you're out." With that, she strode out of the room, leaving Sarah and me in stunned silence. We sat there for what felt like hours, the ticking of the clock on the mantel the only sound in the room. "Mike," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, "what are we going to do?" I pulled her close, my mind racing. Our savings account held just over $9,000.11,000 in such a short time. "I don't know, honey," I admitted, the weight of our situation settling heavily on my shoulders. "But we'll figure something out. We have to." That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, my mind a whirlwind of calculations and half-formed plans. Sarah's soft sobs punctuated the darkness, a painful reminder of the rift this ultimatum had created in her relationship with her mother. As the first light of dawn crept through our window, I made a silent vow. We would find a way out of this mess, no matter what it took. Little did I know then how this unexpected ultimatum would set in motion a chain of events that would change our lives forever. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Barbara busied herself in the kitchen, steadfastly avoiding eye contact as Sarah and I prepared for work. The silence was oppressive, filled with unspoken words and simmering emotions. As I drove to work, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. We had always had a good relationship with Barbara. She had welcomed me into the family with open arms when Sarah and I got married 3 years ago. What had changed? Why this sudden, outrageous demand? The day passed in a blur of meetings and reports, but my mind was elsewhere. During my lunch break, I called our bank, hoping against hope that there might be some option we hadn't considered. The conversation was brief and disheartening. With our current income and credit history, a loan of that size in such a short time frame was out of the question. That evening, Sarah and I sat at our small desk, a notepad between us, trying to brainstorm solutions. We considered everything from selling our car to taking on second jobs. But as the numbers stared back at us, cold and unyielding, the reality of our situation became painfully clear. We were nowhere near our goal, and time was ticking away. Maybe we should just start looking for an apartment, Sarah said softly, her voice heavy with defeat. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. No, we can't give up. We've worked too hard to save what we have. There has to be another way. As the days passed, the tension in the house grew. Barbara became a silent, brooding presence, her demands hanging over us like a storm cloud. Sarah's relationship with her mother, once so close, had devolved into terse exchanges and long, uncomfortable silences. I found myself lying awake at night, the enormity of our predicament weighing heavily on my mind. This house had been our home for 2 years. The thought of being forced out, of starting over with our savings depleted, was almost too much to bear. But more than that, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than met the eye. Barbara's demand seemed so out of character, so sudden and inexplicable. As I stared at the ceiling, listening to Sarah's restless breathing beside me, I made a silent promise. I would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. Little did I know that the answers I sought would come in the most unexpected way, leading us down a path none of us could have anticipated. As the days following Barbara's ultimatum blurred together, my mind became a whirlwind of desperate ideas and half-formed plans. Each morning, I'd wake up with a knot in my stomach, the weight of our impending deadline hanging over me like a dark cloud. Sarah and I moved through the house like ghosts, our voices hushed, our movements careful, as if we were walking on eggshells around Barbara's brooding presence. On Monday morning, I steeled myself for what I knew would be an uncomfortable conversation. I had been with Johnson & Associates for 5 years, slowly climbing the corporate ladder. As I knocked on my boss's door, my palms were sweaty, and my heart raced. "Come in, Mike," Mr. Johnson called out. He looked up from his computer, his bushy eyebrows raised in question. "What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath. "Sir, I was hoping to discuss the possibility of a raise." The words tumbled out, and I found myself explaining our situation, careful to omit the details about Barbara's ultimatum. Mr. Johnson listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, sighing deeply. "Mike, I appreciate your hard work, I really do. But you know the company's policy on raises. We just had our annual review 3 months ago. I'm afraid I can't make an exception, even for you." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. "I understand, sir. Thank you for your time." As I walked back to my cubicle, my mind was already racing to the next option. During my lunch break, I called the local bank where Sarah and I had our accounts. The conversation with the loan officer was brief and disheartening. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson," the officer said, her voice professionally sympathetic. "But with your current credit history and the short time frame, we can't approve a loan of that size. Have you considered a smaller personal loan?" I thanked her and hung up, feeling the walls closing in around me. That evening, I broke the news to Sarah. We sat at our small kitchen table, the sounds of Barbara watching TV in the living room a constant reminder of our predicament. "What are we going to do, Mike?" Sarah whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "We can't possibly come up with that kind of money in time." I reached across the table, taking her hands in mine. "We'll figure something out, honey. We always do." But as the days passed, our options dwindled. We cut our expenses to the bone, brown bagging our lunches, canceling our streaming subscriptions, even selling some of our furniture online. But it was like trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon. We were nowhere near our goal. On Thursday night, as we lay in bed, Sarah turned to me, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through our window. "Mike," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking. What if we sold the car?" I felt my heart sink. Our car, a reliable if somewhat old Honda Civic, was our lifeline. We both needed it to get to work, and the thought of being without it was daunting. But as I looked at Sarah's pleading eyes, I knew we were running out of options. "Okay," I said softly. "We'll look into it tomorrow." The next day, we visited several used car dealerships. The process was grueling, each lowball offer feeling like a personal insult. By the end of the day, we had an offer for $8,000, far less than we had hoped, but more than we had managed to scrape together so far. As we drove home in what would soon no longer be our car, the reality of our situation hit me anew. We were sacrificing our independence, our mobility, all because of Barbara's inexplicable demand. The injustice of it all made my blood boil. "It's not enough," Sarah said quietly, voicing the thought we both shared. "Even with this, we're still short." I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I know. But it's a start." The tension in the house grew with each passing day. Barbara became increasingly withdrawn, barely acknowledging our presence. Sarah, torn between loyalty to her mother and frustration at our situation, oscillated between tears and angry outbursts. One evening, about 2 weeks after the ultimatum, I found Sarah sitting on our bed, surrounded by photo albums. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks streaked with tears. "Hey," I said softly, sitting beside her. "What's all this?" She sniffled, holding up a photo of her, Barbara, and a man I recognized as Sarah's late father. I was just remembering, trying to understand when things changed. "Mom used to be so different, Mike. So warm and loving. I don't know who this woman is anymore." I put my arm around her, pulling her close. "People change, Sarah. But that doesn't make this situation any less unfair." As Sarah cried into my shoulder, I felt a renewed determination. There had to be something we were missing, some angle we hadn't considered. The next day, I threw myself into research, looking into every possible financial option. I explored personal loans from online lenders, peer-to-peer lending platforms, even the possibility of taking on freelance work in addition to my full-time job. But each path led to the same conclusion: we simply couldn't generate that much money in such a short time without resorting to desperate measures. The thought of turning to loan sharks or other less-than-legal options briefly crossed my mind, but I quickly dismissed it. The risks were too high, and I couldn't bear the thought of putting Sarah in that kind of danger. As the end of the 3rd week approached, I felt like a man drowning, desperately grasping at straws. Our savings account was depleted, our car was sold, and we were still short by several $1,000s. The atmosphere in the house had become unbearable, thick with unspoken resentment and fear. One afternoon, as I sat at our desk, surrounded by crumpled papers filled with futile calculations, Sarah burst into the room, her face flushed with anger. "I can't take this anymore, Mike," she said, her voice trembling. "I tried talking to Mom again, trying to understand why she's doing this to us. But she just shut me out, like I'm some kind of stranger. This isn't the woman who raised me. Something's not right." I stood up, pulling her into a hug. As I held her, my mind raced. Sarah was right, something about this whole situation felt off. Barbara's behavior was so out of character, so sudden and inexplicable. There had to be more to the story than we were seeing. "You're right," I said, pulling back to look into Sarah's eyes. "We've been so focused on trying to meet her demand that we haven't stopped to question why she's making it in the first place. There's got to be something we're missing." Sarah nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes for the first time in weeks. "But how do we figure it out? She won't talk to us, won't explain anything." I took a deep breath, an idea forming in my mind. It was risky, potentially a violation of privacy, but we were running out of options. "I think," I said slowly, "it's time we did some digging of our own. There might be clues in her papers, her records. Something to explain why she suddenly needs this money." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between her desire for answers and her respect for her mother's privacy. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, let's do it. But we have to be careful." As we formulated our plan to investigate, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the verge of uncovering something big. Little did I know that our search for answers would lead us to a discovery that would change everything. 2 weeks had passed since Barbara's ultimatum, and the tension in the house had reached a fever pitch. Every creak of the floorboards, Every slamming door felt like a reminder of our impending deadline. Sarah and I had been tiptoeing around, trying to find the right moment to start our investigation into Barbara's sudden need for money. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the opportunity finally presented itself. Barbara had left for her weekly bridge game, leaving the house eerily quiet. Sarah and I exchanged a look, both of us knowing that this was our chance. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly as we stood outside Barbara's home office. I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We need answers, honey. This might be our only shot." With a deep breath, we entered the room. The office was meticulously organized, every surface spotless. It felt wrong to be in here, like we were intruding on sacred ground. But desperation drove us forward. We started with the filing cabinet, carefully rifling through folders of tax returns, bank statements, and utility bills. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I was beginning to think we'd hit a dead end when Sarah gasped. "Mike, look at this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was holding a folder that had been tucked away at the back of the bottom drawer. My heart raced as I saw the label, Robert's Life Insurance. Robert was Sarah's father, who had passed away 5 years ago. We'd always assumed his affairs had been settled long ago. With shaking hands, I opened the folder. Inside was a policy document, and as my eyes scanned the page, I felt the blood drain from my face. The policy was for $100,000, and it had been paid out just 3 months ago. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with shock. "Mom never told us about this. Why would she keep it a secret?" I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't know, but this changes everything. If she received this money, why is she demanding $20,000 from us?" We continued to search, now with renewed vigor. In a desk drawer, we found bank statements that showed a large deposit matching the insurance payout, followed by several substantial withdrawals over the following weeks. What was she spending all this money on? I muttered, more to myself than to Sarah. As we dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. There were multiple transfers to an account we didn't recognize, each for several $1,000s. The most recent statement showed that the account was nearly depleted. "Mike," Sarah said, her voice quavering, could Mom be in some kind of trouble?" I ran a hand through my hair, my mind racing. "I don't know, but something's definitely not right here." Just then, we heard the front door open. Barbara was home early. In a panic, we scrambled to put everything back exactly as we'd found it, our hearts pounding in our chests. We managed to slip out of the office and into the living room just as Barbara walked in. She eyed us suspiciously, her gaze lingering on our flushed faces. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Yes, Mom," Sarah replied, her voice unnaturally high. "We were just discussing our plans." Barbara nodded curtly and headed upstairs, leaving us to collapse onto the couch, adrenaline still coursing through our veins. "What do we do now?" Sarah whispered once we were sure Barbara was out of earshot. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. We need to process what we've found. There's clearly more going on here than we realized. That night, sleep eluded us both. We lay in bed, whispering theories back and forth. Could Barbara have gotten involved in some kind of investment scheme? Was she being blackmailed? The possibilities seemed endless, each more outlandish than the last. The next few days were a blur of secret conversations and furtive glances. We tried to act normal around Barbara, but the weight of our discovery made every interaction feel strained and artificial. I found myself watching Barbara closely, looking for any signs that might explain her behavior. I noticed dark circles under her eyes, a slight tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking. Whatever was going on, it was clearly taking a toll on her. On Friday evening, as we sat around the dinner table in uncomfortable silence, I decided to take a risk. "Barbara," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, "I was wondering if you could tell us more about why you need this renovation money so urgently." Barbara's fork clattered against her plate. She looked up sharply, her eyes narrowing. "I've already told you. The house needs work." "But $20,000 is a lot of money," I pressed. "Surely there must be some specific repairs you have in mind?" For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of fear in Barbara's eyes. But it was gone so quickly, I couldn't be sure. "That's none of your concern," she snapped. "Either you get the money, or you leave. That's all there is to it." The conversation died after that, but I could feel the tension in the room, thick enough to cut with a knife. Later that night, as Sarah and I lay in bed, she turned to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm scared, Mike," she whispered. "I feel like I don't know my own mother anymore. What could be so terrible that she can't tell us about it?" I pulled her close, wishing I had answers to give her. "I don't know, honey. But we're going to figure this out. Together." The next morning, I woke up early, my mind made up. We couldn't go on like this, tiptoeing around the truth. It was time to confront Barbara with what we knew. As I made coffee in the kitchen, steeling myself for the conversation ahead, I heard a noise from Barbara's office. Curious, I crept closer to the door, which was slightly ajar. Inside, I could see Barbara hunched over her desk, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. In front of her was a pile of papers, and as I squinted to see better, my blood ran cold. They were threats. Blackmail letters, demanding money in exchange for silence. I couldn't make out the details, but the tone was clear: pay up, or face the consequences. In that moment, everything fell into place. The secret insurance payout, the desperate demand for money, Barbara's increasingly erratic behavior. She wasn't the villain in this story, she was a victim. As I stood there, frozen in shock, I knew that our confrontation would have to wait. We had stumbled upon a truth far more complex and dangerous than we could have imagined. I retreated silently to the kitchen, my mind reeling. How could I tell Sarah what I'd seen? How could we help Barbara without making the situation worse? As I heard Barbara's office door open, I quickly busied myself with the coffee maker. She entered the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed but her face composed. "Good morning, Mike," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Morning, Barbara," I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. As I watched her pour her coffee with trembling hands, I made a silent vow. We would get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. Barbara might think she was alone in this fight, but she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The weight of my discovery pressed heavily on my chest as I went through the motions of the day. Sarah noticed my distraction, shooting concerned glances my way, but I couldn't bring myself to share what I'd seen just yet. I needed time to process, to figure out the best way to approach this delicate situation. As evening approached, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. Sarah deserved to know the truth about her mother's predicament. After dinner, while Barbara retreated to her room as had become her habit, I led Sarah to our bedroom, closing the door softly behind us. "Sarah," I began, my voice low, "there's something I need to tell you about your mom." Her eyes widened with concern as I recounted what I'd witnessed that morning. As I spoke, Sarah's expression shifted from shock to disbelief to a deep, aching sadness. "Oh, Mom," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Why didn't she come to us? We could have helped her." I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her body shake with silent sobs. "I don't know, honey. But we're going to help her now. We need to confront her, let her know she's not alone in this." Sarah nodded against my chest, then pulled back, wiping her eyes. "You're right. We can't let this go on any longer. Let's talk to her tonight." With our decision made, we steeled ourselves for what was sure to be a difficult conversation. The house was quiet as we made our way to Barbara's room, the only sound the creaking of the old floorboards beneath our feet. I knocked softly on the door. "Barbara, can we talk to you for a moment?" There was a long pause before we heard her muffled reply. "Now's not a good time." Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm but gentle. "Mom, please. This is important. We need to talk to you about the money." Another pause, longer this time. Then, slowly, the door opened. Barbara stood there, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair disheveled. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We entered the room, and I was struck by the chaos that greeted us. Papers were strewn across the bed and floor, and Barbara's usually immaculate appearance was in disarray. She sat heavily on the edge of the bed, not meeting our eyes. Barbara, I began, trying to keep my voice calm and non-confrontational, we know about the life insurance policy. Anne. I saw the letters this morning. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with fear and something else. Was it shame? You had no right, she began, but Sarah cut her off. Mom, please. We're not here to judge you. We want to help. What's going on? Barbara's shoulders sagged, the fight seeming to drain out of her. For a moment, I thought she might not answer. But then, in a voice so low we had to strain to hear, she began to speak. It started about 6 months ago, she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. I received a letter from someone claiming to have information about your father, Sarah. Information that could ruin his reputation, and ours. Sarah gasped softly, but didn't interrupt. Barbara continued, her words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. At first, I thought it was a sick joke. But then they sent details. Things only someone close to your father could have known. They demanded $50,000 to keep quiet. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't let them tarnish your father's memory, not after everything he did for us. She looked up then, her eyes pleading for understanding. When the insurance payout came through, I thought it was an answer to my prayers. I could pay them off, and no one would ever have to know. But they just kept demanding more and more. I've given them almost everything, and now. Her voice trailed off, and she buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. Sarah moved to sit beside her mother, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Oh, Mom, she said softly, why didn't you tell us? We could have faced this together. Barbara shook her head, not looking up. I was ashamed. And scared. I didn't want to burden you with this. Your father, he wasn't perfect, but he loved us. I couldn't bear the thought of you finding out. Finding out what, Barbara? I asked gently, kneeling in front of her. What could be so terrible that you'd risk everything to keep it secret? She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. Your father had an affair, she said, addressing Sarah. Years ago, before you were born. I forgave him, and we moved past it. But this person, they're claiming there's a child. Your half-sibling. The room fell silent as the weight of this revelation settled over us. Sarah's face was a mask of shock, her arm falling away from her mother's shoulders. I don't believe it, Sarah said finally, her voice shaky. Dad would never. I don't know if it's true, Barbara interjected quickly. But the possibility. I couldn't risk it getting out. Your father worked so hard to build his reputation, to provide for us. I couldn't let it all be destroyed. I stood up, pacing the room as I tried to process this new information. Barbara, I said carefully, have you considered that this might be a bluff? That they might not have any real proof? She shook her head. They sent photos, Mike. Old ones, from before Sarah was born. Your father with another woman. It could be innocent, but you panicked, I finished for her. She nodded miserably. Sarah stood up abruptly, her face pale. I need some air, she muttered, rushing out of the room. I moved to follow her, but Barbara caught my arm. Let her go, she said softly. She needs time to process this. I sat down next to Barbara, my mind racing. We need to approach this logically, I said after a moment. First, we need to see all the communication you've had with this blackmailer. Then, we need to consider our options. Have you thought about going to the police? Barbara's eyes widened in fear. No. I can't, if this gets out. Barbara, I said firmly, you're being blackmailed. That's a crime. The police can help. She shook her head vehemently. No police. Please, Mike. I can't bear the thought of this becoming public knowledge. I sighed, realizing this wasn't going to be as straightforward as I'd hoped. Okay, no police for now. But we need to do something. This can't go on. Just then, Sarah reappeared in the doorway, her face set in determination. Mom, she said, her voice steady, I don't care what Dad did or didn't do in the past. He was a good father, and a good husband to you. We're not going to let some lowlife destroy his memory or our family. Barbara looked up at her daughter, hope dawning in her eyes for the first time. You don't hate me? For keeping this from you? Sarah moved to embrace her mother. Of course not. I wish you'd told us sooner, but I understand why you didn't. We're going to fix this, together. As I watched them, a plan began to form in my mind. I think I might have an idea, I said slowly. But it's going to take all of us working together. And Barbara, you're going to have to trust us completely. Can you do that? Barbara nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I can do that. As we huddled together, discussing our next steps, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but we were no longer facing this crisis alone. Whatever came next, we would face it as a family. The days following our confrontation with Barbara were a whirlwind of activity. Our living room had been transformed into a makeshift war room, with papers, notes, and laptops strewn across every surface. Sarah had taken a week off work, citing a family emergency. While I worked remotely, my attention split between my job and our ongoing crisis. Our plan was multifaceted and risky, but it was the best we could come up with given the circumstances. Step 1 was to gather all the evidence we had, every letter, every email, every scrap of information the blackmailer had sent. Barbara was reluctant at first, but with gentle coaxing from Sarah, she finally opened up completely, sharing details she had previously kept hidden. I can't believe I'm doing this, Barbara muttered as she handed over a thick folder of documents. I've spent so long trying to keep this secret, and now. Sarah squeezed her mother's hand. It's okay, Mom. We're going to get through this together. As we pored over the evidence, a pattern began to emerge. The blackmailer, who went by the pseudonym Truthseeker, had an intimate knowledge of Robert's past, but there were inconsistencies in their story. Dates didn't quite match up, and some of the details seemed off. Look at this, I said, pointing to an email. They claim Robert was in Chicago on July 15, 1985, but we have his work records showing he was in New York that entire week. Sarah leaned in, her brow furrowed. And here, they mention a birthmark on Dad's left shoulder, but his was on his right. These discrepancies gave us hope. It seemed increasingly likely that Truthseeker was working off incomplete or inaccurate information. But we needed more than just hope, we needed a plan to turn the tables. That's where the second part of our strategy came in. We decided to hire a private investigator to look into the blackmailer's identity. It was a significant expense, eating into what was left of our savings, but we all agreed it was necessary. I'll cover the cost, Barbara insisted, but I shook my head. We're in this together, I said firmly. We'll split it 3 ways. The PI, a no-nonsense woman named Linda Martinez, got to work immediately. She was skeptical at first, warning us that anonymous blackmailers were notoriously difficult to track down. But as we shared our findings and suspicions, her interest was piqued. You might be onto something here, she admitted. Give me a week. I'll see what I can dig up. While Linda worked her magic, we focused on the third part of our plan, preparing for a confrontation. Sarah and I spent hours role-playing different scenarios, trying to anticipate how the blackmailer might react to various approaches. Barbara watched these sessions with a mixture of anxiety and admiration. I can't believe how calm you both are, she said one evening. I've been a nervous wreck for months, and you're handling this like professionals. I smiled wryly. Trust me, we're terrified. We're just channeling that fear into action. As the week drew to a close, Linda called with news. I've got a name and an address, she said, her voice crackling over the speakerphone. Your Truthseeker is actually a woman named Evelyn Reeves. She's 62 years old, lives in a small apartment in Queens, and, get this, she used to work as a secretary at Robert's law firm back in the 80s. The revelation hit us like a thunderbolt. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Barbara sank into a chair, her face pale. I remember her, Barbara whispered. She was infatuated with Robert. He had to let her go because she kept making inappropriate advances. Everything was falling into place. Evelyn, spurned and bitter, had concocted this scheme as a way to get revenge and make some money in the process. She had enough inside knowledge to make her threats seem credible, but not enough to withstand close scrutiny. Armed with this information, we made our final preparations. We decided that I would be the one to confront Evelyn, with Sarah and Barbara listening in via a hidden earpiece. It was risky, but we felt it was the best way to catch her off guard. The day of the confrontation arrived, cloudy and cool. I stood outside Evelyn's apartment building, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah's voice came through the earpiece, steady and reassuring. "You've got this, Mike. We're right here with you." I buzzed Evelyn's apartment, and after a moment, a wary voice answered. "Who is it?" "Ms. Reeves," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "My name is Michael Thompson. I'm here on behalf of Barbara and Sarah Johnson. We need to talk about Robert." There was a long pause, then the buzzer sounded. I made my way up to her apartment, each step feeling like a mile. When I reached her door, it opened before I could knock, revealing a small, grey-haired woman with sharp eyes and a pinched expression. "Come in," she said curtly. "Though I don't know what there is to talk about." I entered the apartment, which was cluttered but neat. Evelyn gestured for me to sit on a worn sofa while she perched on an armchair across from me. "Ms. Reeves," I began, "we know about the blackmail. We know you worked with Robert Johnson in the 80s, and we know you've been threatening his family with false information about an affair and a secret child." Evelyn's face remained impassive, but I saw a flicker of something, fear, surprise, in her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I leaned forward, my voice low and intense. "We have all the evidence, Ms. Reeves. We've gone through every letter, every email. We've found the inconsistencies in your story. We know you're bluffing." For a moment, I thought she might continue to deny everything. But then, like a deflating balloon, she seemed to collapse in on herself. "He ruined my life," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I loved him, and he threw me away like I was nothing." I felt a mix of pity and anger as I looked at this bitter, lonely woman. "That doesn't justify what you've done," I said firmly. "You've terrorized an innocent family, extorted money under false pretenses. That's a crime, Ms. Reeves." She looked up sharply. "Are you going to the police?" I took a deep breath. This was the crucial moment. "That depends on you. We're willing to let this go, no charges, no further action, if you agree to 3 conditions. First, you return every cent you've taken from Barbara. Second, you sign a legally binding agreement never to contact the Johnson family again. And third, you provide us with every piece of information you have about Robert, photos, letters, everything." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse? Then we go to the police with everything we have. You'll face charges for blackmail and fraud. Your choice." The room was silent for what felt like an eternity. I could hear Sarah and Barbara breathing through my earpiece, waiting tensely for Evelyn's response. Finally, Evelyn nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine. You'll get your money back. And your agreement. And the information. Such as it is." Relief washed over me, so intense I felt lightheaded. "Thank you, Ms. Reeves. We'll have our lawyer draw up the agreement. You'll never hear from us again after this is done." As I left the apartment, I heard Sarah's voice in my ear, choked with emotion. "You did it, Mike. It's over." But it wasn't quite over. The next few weeks were a flurry of legal documents, bank transfers, and tense meetings. True to her word, Evelyn returned the money and signed the agreement. The evidence she provided was mostly fabricated or exaggerated, confirming our suspicions about her bluff. Slowly but surely, life began to return to normal. The tension in the house dissipated, replaced by a newfound closeness. Barbara, freed from her secret burden, became more open and affectionate. Sarah, while still processing the revelations about her father, found strength in the knowledge that we had faced this crisis together. As for me, I found myself reflecting on the unexpected journey we had been through. What had started as a shocking ultimatum had turned into a test of our family's resilience and love. We had emerged stronger, closer, and with a deeper understanding of each other. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, a scene that had once been fraught with tension but was now filled with warmth and laughter, Barbara raised her glass in a toast. "To family," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And to the unexpected blessings that come from facing our fears together." As we clinked our glasses, I realized that sometimes, the most difficult challenges can lead to the most profound growth. Our family had been tested, and we had not only survived but thrived. Whatever the future held, I knew we would face it together, stronger and more united than ever before.